Are you trying to learn how to drive a stick shift? Most people struggle with it, and it's not because it's hard. It's because nobody ever explains to you what's actually going on. They'll tell you to push the clutch, give it gas, shift the gears, but they don't explain why the car stalls or why it jerks and why it feels so inconsistent. And that's where people get frustrated and give up. Now, I've been working on cars for over 35 years, and once you understand the clutch and transmission are actually working together, this starts to make a whole lot more sense. In this video, I'm going to break it down in a simple way and then show you how to use that to actually drive a manual car smoothly. I'll have you driving in no time. All right, before I get you guys inside the vehicle and we start learning how to drive, I want to explain a little bit what's actually going on under the hood and under the car. We've got a couple of components in there that we need to understand what is really happening. We've got an engine here under the hood. Underneath the car, we've got a transmission. And then in between those two pieces, we have a piece called the clutch. The clutch is going to be the part that's doing all the work. This is the part that is the most difficult about driving a stick shift. What we have going on here is we have an engine that's running and it's spinning even at idle at 800 RPM. So we've got this thing in motion, and we've got the transmission internal parts stationary because the car is standing still. So we've got to take a part that's in motion and we have to transmit that energy into a part that's standing still. And that requires some kind of cushion or buffer in between the two. This is what the clutch disc is doing. Now, there's a couple of components to driving a stick shift that you need to understand, and they're fairly separate components. One is operating the clutch itself. We're engaging or disengaging those two components. We want the transmission and engine to be married together, or we want them to be disconnected, or they're going to be somewhere in between as we're trying to transfer power from a moving component to a stationary component. Now, I'm really trying to break this down for you in terms you can understand, but that's the most important thing you need to understand. We've got an object in motion and an object that's stationary, and we're trying to connect those two things, okay? The shifting component is something completely different now. The shifting is us using the gear ratios that are available to us inside the transmission in a fashion that works best for the way that we want the car to operate. We're going to go into that a little more inside the car, but let's try to separate the two items for now: clutch operation versus shifting operation. And we're going to start off with the clutch work, but what you really need to know is that every time you step on that clutch pedal, what you're doing is you're disengaging the two components, engine and transmission. They're being separated from each other. And every time we let that clutch pedal out, we're engaging the two components. Anything in between, we're allowing some of that slippage to go on, and that keeps the engine from stalling. It's important that you understand how to start the car. And we're going to talk about some of the controls in here as well. Okay, so we've obviously got a parking brake here. When you pull this up, you want to pull it so it's tight, and then you press the thumb lever and pull up at the same time, and then release it while holding the thumb lever down to release the parking brake. Okay, so this is going to be a lot like every other car you have, unless you have a foot activated parking brake or an automatic parking brake, something that's electronic. So it's important that when you want to release this, you understand you have to probably pull it up a bit, press the button, and then release it down. Okay, so it should have the parking brake on while it's parked. A lot of people will keep their car parked in gear, whether first or second, third, it doesn't really matter. That holds the transmission a little bit from turning. So sometimes it's a good practice to do that, just park your car in gear. Now, I want to talk about the position of this gear shift lever, okay? Right now, we've got the transmission in the neutral position. Neutral means none of the gears are engaged. So right now, you can see if I push this to the left, or if I push it to the right, it has a lot of movement in it, okay? If I were to put this into a gear, first gear, let's say, left and right, it barely moves. If I go into fourth gear, left and right, it barely moves. But when I'm in neutral, I have a lot of movement here because I have to be able to engage the left side of this gate, the right side, and even the reverse side. So a lot of drivers will just feel that neutral by shaking the shifter left and right. Okay, and that's kind of how you know your car is in neutral. You can feel how sloppy the shift lever is. And once you get it into gear, you can no longer move it that far. All right, so it's important you get the feel for that, finding neutral, because you don't want to be looking at your shift lever all the time while you're driving. The next thing I want to talk about here is the shift gate on here, the pattern of the shifting on it. So this is letting you know that if I go from the neutral position, which is actually right in the middle between the 3 and the 4. Okay, so think of this as a left position that has 1 and 2, maybe a right position that has 5, 6, and reverse, and then in between will be the 3 and the 4. So if I took this straight from the middle position and I push it straight up, that should be 3rd gear, okay? If I pull it straight down, that should be 4th gear. If I go to the left and up, that should be 1st gear, left and down, 2nd. To the right and up, 5th gear. Same for 6th, and then down and to the right, all the way down to the right is going to be reverse gear. Okay, so it's just important you know how to engage these gears before you get started. For now, learning to use the clutch, I told you I want to think of them as 2 separate entities. We're going to work with the clutch first, and then we're going to work on shifting gears, okay? But we need to know how to get it started, and that's why I'm telling you, we want to start the car in neutral. It is possible to start the vehicle in gear, but that requires you to depress the clutch all the way to the floor, and then you need to be aware that once the engine's running, if you let that clutch out, the car will start moving, okay? So the safest method is just to start it in neutral. You'll need to step on the clutch most cars anyway, so we're going to depress that clutch all the way to the floor. We're going to start it like any other car, okay? And then we'll slowly let that clutch pedal up again. And the vehicle's in neutral, so nothing is going to move. You're not in any danger of engaging any gears, going forward or backwards, right? We've got our parking brake set, and we've got the car in neutral. It's running, all right? So this is going to be your resting state. If you're at a stoplight or something, chances are you'll have the car in neutral. You won't have the parking brake on, but you will have your foot on the brake pedal as you would any other vehicle, okay? So now when we're ready to move this vehicle, we're going to release our parking brake. We're going to step on the clutch. Now remember, the stepping on the clutch is separating the engine from the transmission completely, okay? There's no movement between the 2 parts. So when we step on that clutch, we're going to go all the way to the left and up into 1st gear. And then the best way to practice this is with no gas pedal. So what we're going to do, we're just going to let off the brake here, and I'm slowly going to let this clutch pedal out until I feel the car start to creep ever so slightly, okay? I'm barely off the floor here. I was barely rocking the car, and you can see how slow I'm moving, releasing the clutch pedal off of the floor. Okay, and this is one technique that you want to practice because you need to start to feel that friction in the clutch disc where the engine is starting to turn the transmission, okay? That's what we're doing. We're controlling that power flow from the engine to the transmission. So get comfortable with finding this spot right here. Okay, this is the engagement point of the clutch. So right now I'm just kind of barely rocking the car back and forth, okay? I hope you can see that well. Now the next step is once you feel that friction point, you feel that engagement start to go, we can go further. And what I like to do if you're in a parking lot, and it should be in flat ground hopefully somewhere, practicing this where there's no traffic obviously. And what we're going to do is we're going to slowly release the clutch pedal with no gas until we make this car move, okay? So here we go. I'm going to release that clutch to the engagement point. You can feel it coming. Here it is, and the car is starting to roll forward. Now I'm doing this very, very slowly, and I'm not letting off the clutch pedal all the way. My vehicle is starting to roll at maybe 3 or 4 miles an hour, okay? And once I get going maybe 3, 4, 5 miles an hour, I can let off this clutch pedal completely, okay? Now the vehicle is not going to go very fast because I haven't given it any gas. It's just basically using the engine's idle speed, which is around 800 RPM, to propel this car forward. This is as fast as we'll go without any gas, unless we're going downhill, obviously. And then when we want to stop the car, it's important that we put the clutch pedal in all the way to the floor and use your brake like you normally would, okay? So we're going to do that one more time here. I'm going to let this clutch pedal out, allow the car to creep. No brakes, no gas. Nice and slow, and we start moving. Now I want to show you what happens if we let the clutch pedal out too quickly. So we're going to do the same exercise here. Okay, we're going to put the car into gear. Clutch pedal is depressed. We're in 1st gear. We're going to let off the brake, and we're going to let this clutch out. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to let it out too fast, and you're going to see what happens. Okay, the car stalls. Now the reason it's stalling is because we haven't got enough engine RPM to keep the vehicle running. All right, we basically loaded the engine so far down, and we brought the RPM down so far on the engine that the vehicle shut off. It can't run at 200 or 300 RPM, okay? So what we're trying to do is find a little balance here between that friction point that when we're releasing the clutch and the engine RPM, okay? And that's why a lot of times you'll see if you're on a hill or something, we'll need to actually use the gas pedal. So after you've practiced this, using the clutch pedal only and slowly releasing it and going up to 5 miles an hour or so, you'll be ready for the next step. So we're gonna go through that. I'm gonna show you how to use some gas and some clutch at the same time. So here we go. We're gonna restart the car. We're gonna put it in first gear. And now what we're gonna do is we're going to find that friction point again, okay, where the vehicle engine starts to idle down a little bit and the vehicle just barely starts to creep, okay? And then we're going to go ahead and start applying some throttle here. My right foot, you can hear the engine. We're going to apply a little bit of throttle and slowly release that clutch again like we did originally. So now I'm holding the throttle at 1500 RPMs or so, and I'm letting the clutch pedal out, okay? So now, if I hold steady on the throttle, I can do 15 miles an hour. I'm off the clutch completely. I'm going to make another pass here. I want to show you that again. So I'm putting the clutch in. I'm shifting the car into first gear. I'm letting off the brake and letting the clutch out slowly while giving it a little bit of gas, okay? You can hear the RPMs coming up, and I'm still on that clutch until I get going a bit, okay? Now, I want to show you what we need to do when we come to a stop. So as long as I'm in gear and I'm moving, I don't even need to be on the gas, but as long as the car is rolling over 5 miles an hour or so, you're not really in any danger of stalling the car in first gear, okay? So we can kind of continue this process where you drive as a normal car, only using the gas and the brake. We don't need the clutch right now because we haven't come to a stop. So I can kind of just drive around in first gear. You know, maybe I can get up to 20 miles an hour or so before we need to shift, but it'll function like a regular car where you're just driving normally with the gas and the brake, okay? It's not till we get underneath that 5 miles an hour we need to think about the clutch again. All right, so I want to show you what happens now. We're gonna continue on. We're driving, letting the clutch out slow, first gear, giving just a tiny bit of gas. I'm going to get it up to about 10 miles an hour or so, and I want to show you what happens if we don't disengage the clutch. We have to separate the engine from the transmission. What happens when we don't do that, okay? So now I'm slowing and the car is starting to buck a little, okay? It doesn't like 3 miles an hour with no clutch operation, all right? We have that zone now where the engine's starting to slug and stall, and that's why you get this bucking, jerking sensation, okay? So what we need to do is we need to give it a little bit of clutch. We need to start to allow the clutch to slip a little. Right now with the clutch released, there's no slipping going on, okay? We want to slip it just a little bit, so we're going to press it down maybe about a quarter to half of the way, okay? And that'll stop the bucking sensation. Okay, so you want to give it a little bit of clutch if you need to at this very, very slow speed, you know, 0 to 3 or 4 miles an hour. You want to be in that zone where you're on the clutch a little bit. You're not completely off of it. That stops the bucking and the jerking. The next thing I want to show you is what happens to the car now if we don't slip the clutch a little in that range, 0 to 3 or 4 miles an hour. We're going to try to come to a stop without touching the clutch. The car is bucking badly and then it stalls, okay? We got to find that zone there where we're gonna apply some clutch when we get down to that very low speed, okay? This is where people really struggle. As we're coming to a stop, we need to depress the clutch. We need to put that to the floor to disengage the engine and transmission, okay? When we're stopped, we can't have those two components connected and in gear, okay? That's the most important point to remember. So once you've practiced this on flat ground a lot, just first gear, we're not doing anything else. First gear, you want to start the vehicle from a standstill and you want to return to a standstill. Start from a standstill, return to a standstill. You continue to do that until you get comfortable with this slipping of the clutch. The slipping is when the clutch is not fully released and it's also not fully engaged. We found that friction point off the floor, right? So you want to use that to your advantage. The next thing we want to do is we want to really get comfortable with moving to the gas pedal and releasing the clutch at the same time. So hopefully you can see I'm on the brake here, and then I'm going to switch to the gas and the clutch is going to start to release all at the same time, okay? So this is what we're going to do. We're going to give it some gas, and I'm just stopping the vehicle again. So every time we come to a stop, I'm depressing the clutch pedal all the way to the floor so the vehicle doesn't buck or stall. And then every time I go, I'm giving some throttle, and I'm going to start to accelerate. Now, the faster I do this, the faster I accelerate. Okay, so if I want to accelerate a bit harder, as if I were on a hill, I would have to give it more gas, okay, and still find that friction point at the same time. Okay, see how quickly we do that. Now, the more gas you give, the less chance you have of stalling the car, but the more damage you do to your clutch. Okay, so that's why racing clutches don't last long, because we want a lot of power. We get the engine RPM up, then we let that clutch out, and we're trying to accelerate faster. We don't want to be racing around. That's bad for your clutch. But you want to find some balance there between throttle and clutch if you can. Again, once you get going a few miles an hour, it's safe to come off the clutch. Now that you've practiced this technique of releasing the clutch while giving it gas, coming to a stop, you're able to get the car moving and stopping without stalling, without jerking, without bucking. You really want to learn to use this technique where we're switching to the throttle a little bit more quickly from the brake pedal, because if you're on a steep hill, you're going to need more throttle, and you're going to need to be more careful with the clutch how quickly you release it, okay? So the trick then becomes to try to catch the car on a hill on the clutch. So what that means exactly is that we want to have that clutch engagement holding the car from rolling backwards. Okay, this technique takes a little bit of practice, but if you find that friction point that we talked about in the first step here, if you know where that friction point is, then you can release the clutch pedal to that friction point where we were using no gas. Okay, we're starting there with my foot on the brake now. So I'm holding the brake. I've got that friction point. I'm feeling it in the clutch. The engine's starting to lug. You can feel it wants to stall almost, and I'm just holding the clutch pedal right here. It's halfway. It's not on the floor. It's not all the way up. Okay, this is the point where you want to be at before you switch to the throttle. Okay, if you're on a steep hill, you want to hold the car on the clutch, using your brake as well, and then we're just going to quickly switch to the throttle. You're going to accelerate and go. Okay, now we don't need that much throttle, but when you're learning to accelerate on a hill, you may want to use that much throttle to keep yourself from rolling backwards at all, okay, or from stalling. As we're going up a steep hill, you're going to need a little bit more gas than you would if you were going downhill, right? We already know we can move the car with no throttle at all, but once you get on a hill, you're going to need some throttle. Otherwise, you're just going to sit there. Even if you catch it on the clutch and you're just kind of hanging there, the car's not rolling backwards, you're still going to need some throttle to make it move forward, okay? So that's what you'll want to do. Let's go ahead and talk about the gear selector here. We've got a few different selections on here. You might have 1, 2, 3, you might have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it doesn't really matter. 7, you could have many different gear selections on there, but they all work similar. The lowest gear is number 1, and the highest gear is going to be your highest number. And that purpose of that is to allow you to continue to increase your speed. If you're on the freeway, you're going to be in the highest number. In this car, you might be in 6th gear. If you're going slow in a parking lot, we're going to be in 1st gear. Okay, all the gears in between are just finding some more speed ranges for you, let's call it. Okay, now it's important to know the lower the gear you have, the better the car is going to accelerate, but also it's going to limit your speed. Okay, so this is why I wanted to separate the gear shifting portion from the clutch portion, because the gear shifting is a skill that you're going to have to learn as you drive. Okay, I can't tell you exactly what speed you should be in each gear, because every car is a little bit different. But you'll know because you'll hear the engine start to race. Okay, and you'll also feel the car is not going to want to go any faster, really. So ideally, we want this engine to be somewhere in the 1500 to 3000 RPM range on your tachometer. Okay, that's for normal driving, wherever you are. You want to kind of be in that range. The higher RPM we have, the more power we have available to transmit to the rear wheels. Okay, the lower the RPM, with better fuel economy we're going to get. So you're always finding this balance of how well you want the car to accelerate versus how fast you need to go versus maybe fuel economy. Okay, so the important thing to know, first gear is just to get you started, and then you'll continue to move through the gears the faster you go. If you don't need a higher gear, you don't necessarily need to shift to a higher gear. If you're only going to drive at 30 miles an hour, we don't need to be in the top gear. We don't need to be in 5th or 6th gear. Okay, what I want to show you is how we shift from one gear to the next. Okay, and generally what's going to happen, once you get moving, we're going 10, 15 miles an hour, you're going to depress the clutch all the way to the floor, and then you're going to go from your first gear to your second gear, and then we're going to go ahead and let that clutch out again a little bit faster than we did when we were starting from a stop, and we're going to switch back to the gas. So the process is going to look like this. I want to talk about it as I drive here. So we're going to let this clutch out. We're going to start driving, a little bit of gas. Okay, now we're going about 10 miles an hour. I want to shift to second gear. I'm going to depress the clutch, let off the gas, shift to second gear. I'm going to let the clutch back out and get back on the gas again, and that's going to allow me to drive even faster. All right, now I want to demonstrate to you what happens if we stay in first gear and we accelerate and we don't ever shift. Okay, and this is another example where the car can get a little bit jerky when you're in high RPM and you let off the throttle and the car wants to buck a bit because you never shifted to the next gear. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to accelerate slowly, and then we're going to let off the clutch, and now I'm just going to keep accelerating. I'm doing 40 miles an hour, but I can't go any faster. My engine is revving to the moon. Okay, the only way I can go faster now is to step on the clutch, shift to second, let the clutch back out, and I can continue on the throttle and drive faster. Okay, so now we're doing 40 miles an hour, but the engine's not racing. Now I can also go to third gear, clutch, shift, and the engine RPMs come down again. I can go to fourth gear. We haven't gone any faster now, but just keep seeing the RPM drop. Every time I pick a higher gear, the RPM comes down even further. We've talked about how to upshift and why. We need to talk about downshifting. Downshifting is the reverse of upshifting. So if we're upshifting because we're going faster, we probably want to downshift because we're going slower. Okay, the downshifting process is just the reverse of what we're doing. So as we're slowing, so let's say I get up here into third gear, or second gear, third gear, but I see something up ahead, I need to slow down. So I apply the brakes. Now you see I'm not using the clutch at all. I can still accelerate and brake without the clutch, but my RPMs are getting low, and I say if I want to accelerate, I don't have any power, so I can depress the clutch, put it in second gear, release the clutch, and then continue to drive, okay? Again, we can shift up to third. As we go faster, I see something up ahead, I can start braking, okay? I can downshift to second gear, let the clutch out again, and then I can start to accelerate. Now, this is something you might want to practice a bit, where you're going between second and third gear or third and fourth gear as you accelerate and slow down. The process doesn't change any as we move through the rest of the gears. So if you're going 50 miles an hour and you're slowing down to 10 miles an hour, you might move through 3 or 4 gears. Now let's walk through an example where I start from a stop. Let's say I'm at a stop sign. I'm going to start from a stop. I'm going to go all the way up to fourth gear, and then I need to come to another stop sign. I want to show you there's a couple of techniques you can use to do that. One thing we can do is we can just put the car in neutral long before we stop. We can let off the clutch, and then we can just let this vehicle come to a stop normally with the brakes, not using any clutch whatsoever. The other option is to downshift through the gears. Now, you would probably be better suited to work through the gears. This way, if you need to accelerate again, you're already in the proper gear selection, okay? But I want to show you this technique of where you just put the car in neutral and you use the brakes to come to a complete stop. Okay, so we're going to accelerate from a stop. We're going to shift to second gear. We're going to shift to third gear. We're going to shift to fourth gear. And then we see a stop sign. So what we're going to do, we're going to step on the clutch, we're going to put it in neutral, and we're just going to let off that pedal. And we can just use the brakes now to slow us to a complete stop like you would in any other car. Okay, you don't need to do anything differently. We don't need to step on the clutch when we come to a stop because we're already in neutral. Okay, already in neutral. We don't need to do anything differently. All right, so let me demonstrate now. Just downshifting through the gears, but not letting the clutch out. So the same thing, we're going to accelerate up to fourth gear. We're in third gear. We're in fourth gear. Then we see a stop sign ahead, so we're going to slow down. But now this time what I'm going to do is going to step on the clutch. I'm going to go to third gear as I'm stopping. And as I'm slowing more, I'm still in the clutch. I'm going down to second gear. And as I come to a complete stop, now I'm in first gear. Okay? We've essentially done similar to the last time. The only thing is we've left ourselves an option to start accelerating again. Okay? We're not starting from neutral anymore. And then there is one more technique, and that's called engine braking. So we can actually use the engine to help slow us down. In this example, I'll go up to third gear and then we'll downshift a second, but this time we're going to let the clutch out as we downshift in a second. It's going to help slow the car down because we're using the engine's RPMs to slow us down. So let's try that. We're going to go first gear. We're going to shift to second gear. We'll shift to third gear. And now as we slow down, you're going to see I'm going to shift to second gear, but I'm going to let the clutch back out. Using the engine RPMs. Okay, down to first gear and I'll let the clutch out again. And that high engine load is what's helping us do some engine braking in addition to the brake pedal. Okay, so that's kind of maybe a little more advanced technique. I don't think that's something you should be practicing out of the gate necessarily. You will learn to do that as you drive more. I would say use one of the first two options. Accelerate, you're coming to a stop, you can put it in neutral and then use your brakes like normal. Or you can hold your foot on the clutch and work your way through the gears, okay? The next thing I want to talk about is the reverse gear. Reverse gear can be a little tricky to engage based on the design of the engine. We can't have the car moving very quickly when we engage reverse, okay? So you generally want to be at a complete stop if you can when you engage reverse. Same process, we're going to step on the clutch, we're going to put it in reverse, okay, and then we're going to let the clutch out slowly. This doesn't change anything. The process doesn't change whether you're going forward or backwards, okay? So if I let my foot off the brake and I slowly engage the clutch, okay, I'm not even giving it any gas, the car is going backwards, okay? The process hasn't changed any, but what has changed is the gear ratios a little bit, okay, and the fact that we're going backwards. Now, because you don't really go backwards very fast, there's never really an opportunity to completely let off the clutch, okay? And this is one thing that's maybe a little bit different than going forward. When I say when we go forward, we can go, right now I'm in first gear going forward, I have no foot on the clutch and I'm going 5 miles an hour. When we go backwards, we're rarely going that fast, right? So I'm going to show you how we do it. I'm going to give it a little bit of motion here. I'll let off the clutch going backwards, okay? But I'm off now completely. I'm going backwards probably about 5 miles an hour also, but I might be going faster than you might be wanting to go in a parking lot or something, okay? So if you're driving long distance backwards like I am right now, you can let your foot off the clutch just like we did going forward. But the problem is if we're trying to park, you're not going to be traveling that quickly. So what you'll need to do, and I'm going to demonstrate here, we're going to park this car in a spot. And to give you an idea what it looks like, if you're trying to turn and back up into a spot all at the same time, you're going to need to feather that clutch a bit. You're going to need to keep your foot in that friction zone a little bit because we're not going very fast in reverse, okay? So, of course, you want to look behind you when you're driving, unless you've got a rear view camera maybe, looking through your mirrors, whatever you're doing. I'm going to turn the wheel. Now I'm going backwards. I'm going to give it just a tiny bit of throttle here, and I'm letting the clutch halfway out or so, okay? And I'm just working my way into a parking spot. Now, as I'm slowing down, I still have to step on the clutch. Remember, every time we come to a stop, we have to step on the clutch while the car is in any gear, okay? Otherwise, the car is going to stall. You see that? So we're able to park in a spot, put it in neutral, take my foot off the clutch, set my parking brake, now we're parked. Here's another example of backing out of a spot instead of backing into a spot. So I'm starting the vehicle, I'm in neutral, step on the clutch, I go to the right and down, I'm in reverse now, and now parking brake is off, I'm looking behind me, or I'm looking through my mirrors, rear view cameras, however you normally drive, okay? We're gonna switch to catching it on the clutch a little bit of throttle, and then we're slowly backing up. Now I'm barely moving here, right? So I have to keep my foot in the friction zone on the clutch, okay? We've got to make sure we're staying engaged. I'm not letting it all the way out because I'm going too slow. Stepping on the clutch again as I come to a stop. Then we go forward. Same process applies. In the friction zone there until we get going up to some speed, a few miles an hour, and now I can let off the clutch. All right, now that we've returned the vehicle to the garage here, it's important you know how to set this up, park it. We're just gonna go ahead and set the parking brake as tight as we can, okay? So pull that thing up. This is really the only thing that's holding the car in place. So we wanna make sure the parking brake is always set. You can leave the vehicle in neutral. I think I talked about this a little bit earlier, or you can put the car in gear. Most people have a habit of just putting the car in gear. So you can shut the car off, and then you can put the car into gear and just leave it sitting like this, okay? So I've tried to walk you through some basic examples of how to operate the clutch in one function and then how to shift in the other one, okay? So the only thing that's going to get you through this is just some trial and error, some experience. You have to feel these things for yourself. When we're talking about those shift points, you know, for shifting from first to second to third to fourth to fifth to sixth, you're going to have to experience this on your own. You're going to have to see that high RPMs equals more power, but also loud noise. And you're going to determine that you want to shift to the next gear, maybe a little earlier than the next guy. If you're trying to accelerate hard, you may want to wind those gears out a little bit longer and not shift to the next gear quite so early. If you're trying to be more economic with your fuel savings, you might want to short shift. That means switching to the next gear a little bit earlier than you might normally do, okay? And keep in mind, when you're short shifting or you're shifting a little too early, you're losing out on a little bit of power, okay? Versus revving the engine out and then shifting. Now, it's also important that you know every car is a little bit different. This vehicle we're driving here is a Subaru. It's got a hydraulic clutch in it. The clutch pressure plate itself is not very stiff or strong, so it makes for a pleasurable driving experience with the clutch. It's fairly soft. The engagement is smooth on it. You may drive a race car with a heavy clutch pressure on it. It may not even have a hydraulic clutch in it. It might be lever actuated, cable actuated. These are all different styles, but you might get in somebody else's car now that you know how to drive stick shift, and you go, well, holy cow, this clutch is super stiff or super grabby. Or you might feel a car where the clutch is worn out, and instead of that friction point being slightly off the floor, you have to let the pedal all the way out, almost so it's completely, your foot's off the pedal before the car starts to move, okay? So there's gonna be a lot of examples, different styles of cars, different levels of clutch wear and things that you might encounter. Not every stick shift car is the same. They all drive a little bit differently. The principles apply, but the actual action of the way the car drives might be different. I'll give you some more examples of this. Normally when we have a car that comes in, the clutch is no good anymore. That clutch grabs really high off the floor, really high, or maybe it's slipping altogether, it doesn't grab at all. And then we put a new clutch in a car and the customer comes to pick it up. I can tell you 9 times out of 10, we all get a chuckle out of it, but when they try to back out of a spot or pull out of a spot after we put a new clutch in the car, they almost 9 out of 10, they always stall the car because they're not used to the clutch grabbing so low. And you get used to your own car when you're driving it all the time, right? And then we put a new part in there and all of a sudden it doesn't operate like you're used to. And we see the result of that, right? A stalled vehicle. Just wanted to reiterate that every car is a little bit different. Nothing can substitute experience and time behind the wheel, time learning these touch points on here, whether it's the shifting or the clutch operation. You're going to have to go through that on your own. But start small in a parking lot. First gear is your friend. Come accelerate and come to a stop. Accelerate and come to a stop. That's going to be the process. Once you get that down, that's the hardest part of driving a stick shift car, is being able to accelerate smoothly and stop smoothly without the chugging, the bucking, the jerking, and all those things. So I hope you found this information helpful. Thanks for following along. I hope to see you out there driving stick shift like a champ in no time. We'll see you in the next video.